What was here before anything? Not before the stars, not before the planets, not before the first spark of biological life in the first warm ocean. What was here before matter itself existed, before time had a direction to move in, before space had anything to contain? 3,000 years ago, a Greek farmer poet named Hesiod stood at the same wall, and he had a name for what was on the other side of it. Chaos. Not the chaos you know, not the noise, the disorder, the plans falling apart. Something older, something that has no equivalent in any language that came after Greek. Tonight, while you sleep, we are going to answer it. Now, let's go back to the moment before anything existed at all. Back to the word the ancient Greeks gave to the thing language cannot quite contain. In the beginning, there was nothing. Not darkness, not silence, not empty space waiting to be filled. Nothing. The kind of nothing that exists before the concept of nothing has any meaning. Before there was a universe to be empty, before there was time to measure emptiness, before there was any awareness to notice that something was absent. The ancient Greeks called this state chaos. And before we go any further, we need to understand what that word actually meant. Because when we say chaos today, we mean something entirely different. We mean disorder, noise, things out of control, traffic jams and missed appointments and plans that have collapsed. We use it casually, almost affectionately sometimes. That was chaos, complete chaos. And when we say it, we mean something temporary, something that can be fixed, something that once was orderly and will be orderly again once someone takes charge and cleans it up. The Greek word chaos meant none of that. Chaos came from a root that meant to gape, to yawn open, to be a vast empty opening. Not the disorder within a system, but the absence of any system at all. Not the mess inside a room, but the state that existed before there was a room. Before there was anything that could become a room, or contain a room, or occupy the space where a room might one day be. Chaos was the gap, the original opening, the formless, boundless, dimensionless space that preceded everything. And the Greeks were careful to say that it was not simply nothing, not the absence of something that had once been there. Chaos was a kind of presence, a potential, the held breath before the first breath, the silence before the first sound. Not the silence that remains after music ends, which is still shaped by the music that preceded it, but the silence that existed before the concept of music was conceivable. Hesiod, the Greek farmer and poet who wrote the Theogony around 700 years before the Common Era, placed chaos at the very beginning of his account of how everything came to be. His first line, in the original Greek, is among the most discussed sentences in the history of Western philosophy. First of all, chaos came into being. That is the translation for words in English, though in Greek it is even more compressed. And those 4 words have been argued over, interpreted, reinterpreted, and thought about by philosophers from Plato forward for nearly 3,000 years without any consensus being reached about exactly what they mean. What was chaos? Was it a god? Hesiod does not call it a god. Was it a place? It seems to precede the concept of place. Was it a force? It is described as coming into being, which implies it was not always there, which raises the question of what was there before it, which leads directly to the kind of infinite regress that keeps philosophers awake at night. The most honest answer is that chaos was the thing that exists before our categories of understanding apply. Before there was matter, there was no concept of matter. Before there was space, there was no concept of distance. Before there was time, there was no concept of before. Chaos occupies the place in the story where language reaches its limit. where the familiar tools of human understanding, the tools we use to describe and categorize and make sense of the world, simply stop working. The ancient Greeks understood this. They were not naive about it. They were not simply telling a children's story about the world beginning from a big, empty space. They were pointing at something genuinely difficult, something that resists articulation, something that the human mind approaches but cannot fully grasp. They gave it a name, chaos, because everything needs a name, even the thing that precedes naming. And they placed it at the beginning of everything, because intellectual honesty required it. If you're going to tell the story of how everything came to be, you have to start before everything. And the place before everything is the place where words run out. Modern physics has its own version of this encounter with the limit of language. The Big Bang is the name we give to the beginning of the universe as we can trace it, the moment when everything we know began. But the Big Bang is not the beginning of the story for physics any more than Zeus is the beginning of the story for Greek mythology. The question of what preceded the Big Bang, what caused it, what was there before it, turns out to be extraordinarily difficult. Not difficult in the sense of we have not found the answer yet, but difficult in a more fundamental sense. The laws of physics, as we understand them, break down completely at the moment of the Big Bang. Time itself may not have existed before it. And if time did not exist before the Big Bang, then the question of what happened before the Big Bang is as meaningless as asking what is north of the North Pole. The question assumes a framework of time and causation and sequence that simply does not apply. The ancient Greeks were not doing physics, but they were doing something that rhymes with physics. They were trying to describe what was before the beginning, and they arrived at the same honest answer that modern physics arrives at. We do not know. We cannot know. We can give it a name. We can say chaos, or we can say the pre-Big Bang state. But the name is a placeholder for an acknowledged ignorance, not a description of something understood. This matters because it tells us something about the kind of story the mythology is. It is not a story that begins with easy certainty. It begins with the hardest problem there is. It begins by looking directly at the place where human understanding stops and saying, here is where everything started. Here, in this thing we cannot quite describe. This is the foundation. Now, close your eyes. Take a breath. Imagine a space that has no walls, no floor, no ceiling, because those concepts don't exist yet. No sound, no silence, because silence is the absence of sound, and sound hasn't been invented. A vast, open potential, like the held breath before the first breath was ever drawn. This is where everything begins, and you are here for it. Chaos was not a place you could visit. It was not a time you could travel back to. It was not a state you could observe from the outside, because there was no outside. There was nothing for chaos to be outside of, and nothing to be the observer who stood outside it. Chaos was total, complete, the only thing there was. How long did chaos exist in this state? The question is unanswerable, and the ancient Greeks knew it was unanswerable. Duration requires time. Time requires something to measure it against, a before and an after, a sequence. Chaos preceded all sequence. It preceded before and after. It simply was. For no duration at all, or for what we would experience as an infinite duration. But experience was not yet possible, and so neither of those descriptions is quite right either. What we can say is that at some point, in a moment that cannot be located on any timeline because there is no timeline, chaos began to change. Not because something caused it to change. There was nothing else to cause anything. Causation requires something prior to the thing caused, and chaos had nothing prior to it. not because it decided to change. Decision requires a mind, and chaos was before minds. It changed simply because that is what it was always going to do. The way a spring that has been coiled must eventually release. The way a held breath must eventually be exhaled. The way potential must eventually become actual, because that is the nature of potential. It reaches toward its own fulfillment. From chaos, something emerged, and that emergence is the beginning of everything we know. Everything that has ever existed, every star and every planet and every ocean and every creature and every city and every thought that has ever been thought, including the thought you are having right now in the dark, listening to this voice. It all comes from that first emergence from chaos. Before chaos changed, there was nothing. After chaos changed, there was Gaia. And with Gaia, the story truly begins. From chaos, the first beings emerged. Not all at once. Not in an explosion or a flash of sudden creation. More like condensation. The way moisture gathers on a cold surface, slowly, inevitably, as if it had always been there and was only now becoming visible. From the formless potential of chaos, the first specific things began to take shape. And the first of them was Gaia. Gaia was the earth. Not a goddess who ruled the earth. Not a divine being who had authority over earthly things. Not a patron of soil and stone. Gaia was the earth itself, given awareness. Every mountain range and every valley floor. Every cave carved by underground water over millions of years. Every cliff and every plain and every river channel cutting its slow path toward the sea. Every grain of soil in every field that has ever been turned by a plow. Every layer of rock laid down over hundreds of millions of years of geological time. Each layer a record of what lived and what happened and what the world was like before the age that produced the layer above it. All of it was Gaia. All of it was alive. All of it was aware. Think about what that experience would be. To be the ground itself. To feel every footstep taken on your surface the way you feel a hand placed gently on your arm. To feel rivers running across you as water runs across skin. To feel the roots of trees pressing down into you, searching for water and nutrients, not as an external intrusion, but as part of your own body doing its own work. To feel glaciers scraping across you over thousands of years as a deep, slow pressure, the way you feel a weight pressed firmly against your back. To feel earthquakes not as things happening somewhere else, somewhere out there in the world, but as things happening inside you. Adjustments in your own structure, the deep grinding of your own bones, and to feel everything that lives on you living within you simultaneously. Every forest and every desert and every ocean. Every creature moving across your surface or burrowing into your depths. All of it, all at once, all the time, without pause, without the ability to focus on one thing and ignore another. The full, complete, constant awareness of being the ground of everything. This was what Gaia was, the first being with full awareness. The oldest intelligence in existence. Not a human intelligence, not even a divine intelligence in any familiar sense, but the intelligence of the earth itself. Slow, deep, patient in a way that makes every other kind of patience seem hurried. The intelligence that knows it will still be here when everything else has changed beyond recognition. She emerged from chaos the way a thought emerges from the silence before thinking begins. Not with announcement, not with drama, simply becoming present, becoming real, becoming the solid ground that everything else would eventually stand on. Gaia was the beginning of substance, the first thing you could touch, the first thing with a surface and a depth, The first thing that had an inside that was different from its outside. The first thing that could be known through contact rather than only through contemplation. Before Gaia, there was only potential. After Gaia, there was something real. If Gaia was the surface of things, Tartarus was what lay beneath. Not simply underground, not simply deeper than Gaia. Tartarus was the absolute bottom of everything. The place that exists at the end of all descending. The point below which there is nothing further to go. The floor of the universe. If the universe can be said to have a floor. Hesiod tried to communicate the depth of Tartarus with an image that has never been surpassed for conveying sheer, vertiginous profundity. He wrote that if you took a bronze anvil and dropped it from the surface of the earth, it would fall for 9 full days and 9 full nights before it reached the floor of Tartarus. 9 days, not 9 seconds, which is already a long time for a falling object. Not 9 hours, 9 days. Through darkness so absolute that the concept of darkness seems insufficient. Through silence so complete that silence is the wrong word for it. Through cold that exists in a place that has never had any warmth to lose. 9 days of falling, and then impact, and then, at last, the bottom. There is something about this image that the mind resists fully accepting. 9 days of falling implies a distance that cannot be calculated in any human unit of measurement that means anything. It implies a depth that is less a physical distance than a metaphysical category. Tartarus is not just very far down. Tartarus is the deep in its purest, most absolute form. The depth that has no comparison, no reference point, no way to communicate itself except by the failure of ordinary language to contain it. Tartarus was not yet a prison when it emerged from chaos. That role would come later, when beings needed to be confined, and there was nowhere else in the universe profound enough or secure enough to hold them. For now, in this first moment of creation, Tartarus was simply the necessary counterpart to Gaia. Earth has a surface. It also has a depth. Gaia was the surface. Tartarus was the depth. Between them, they defined the full vertical range of existence. If you have ever stood at the edge of a very deep natural place, a canyon or a cave shaft or a sea cliff dropping straight down into dark water, and felt that specific physical response that very deep places provoke in the body, the slight vertiginous pull, the involuntary awareness of your own fragility and smallness, that is a pale human echo of what Tartarus represented. The deep that makes everything else feel less solid. The abyss that reminds the surface of the world that it is floating above something incomprehensible. Tartarus held the weight of the world above it. Without that depth, the surface had nowhere to rest. Gaia needed Tartarus below her the way a mountain needs the bedrock beneath it. The deepest thing supports everything else. The thing you cannot see and cannot reach and cannot name is holding up the thing you stand on. Then came Eros. And here every association you have with that name, every image of the small winged child with his bow and arrows, every Valentine, every romantic comedy, every pop song about falling in love must be set aside entirely. Because the primordial Eros had nothing to do with any of that. The primordial Eros was a force, not a feeling, not an emotion, not the experience of romantic attraction. A fundamental, physical, universal force. The force of attraction itself. The reason that things move toward each other rather than remaining forever apart. Consider what the universe would be without this force. Particles of matter, scattered, each one isolated from every other, unable to interact, unable to combine, unable to do anything except exist in absolute separation across distances so vast that no interaction was ever possible. No atoms, because atoms require particles to attract each other and combine. No molecules, because molecules require atoms to attract each other and combine. No chemistry, no biology, no stars, no planets, no life, no consciousness, no stories, no this moment. Just an infinite scattering of separate, solitary particles, each one alone in an empty and meaningless universe. But that is not what happened. Instead, particles attract each other. They draw together. They combine and recombine and build structures of increasing complexity. And at every scale, from subatomic particles to galaxy clusters spanning hundreds of millions of light years, the same tendency operates. Things pull toward each other. Things come together. Things form bonds and build structures that are more than the sum of what came before. Eros was that tendency, the pulling toward, the coming together, the reason that existence chooses complexity and connection over isolation and simplicity. The ancient Greeks placed this force at the very beginning of creation, among the first 5 things to emerge from chaos, because they understood something profound about the nature of the universe. This force is not secondary. It is not an add-on, not a feature that developed later, not something that appeared once matter had organized itself sufficiently to experience attraction. It was there from the beginning. It was one of the first things. And at the human scale, the scale we know most directly, Eros is the reason that 2 people in a room full of strangers find themselves moving toward each other before they have exchanged a word. It is the reason that certain places feel like home the first time you see them. The reason that certain ideas catch in the mind and refuse to let go. The reason that love, when it arrives, feels less like something that happened to you and more like a recognition of something that was always true. The universe is built on attraction. The force that holds atoms together and the force that draws people together are different expressions of the same fundamental tendency. Eros was its name at the beginning of things. Next came Erebus, darkness, but not the darkness you know, not the darkness of a room with the lights off, where your eyes adjust and slowly the shapes of things become visible and the darkness resolves into a kind of dim seeing. Not the darkness of a cloudy night, where there is still the glow of distant cities, the faint luminescence of the sky itself, the world visible in outline, if not in detail. Erebus was darkness as a substance, darkness as a presence rather than an absence. Not the lack of light, but the actual existence of something that opposed light, that filled space the way water fills a vessel, that had its own weight and texture and quality of experience. The ancient Greeks believed that Erebus lived in the space between the surface of the earth and the realm of the dead, the deep underground region through which the souls of the dead passed on their way to Hades. A darkness so complete that it was qualitatively different from any darkness the living world contained. Not the darkness of night, which is only the shadow side of a world still lit by stars and moon and the reflected light of a sun just below the horizon. The darkness of Erebus was the darkness of a place where light had never been, where the concept of light had no referent, where darkness was not the absence of something but the presence of itself. If you have ever been in a cave far enough from the entrance that no outside light reaches you at all, and you have turned off whatever light you brought with you, you have been briefly in something approaching Erebus. That total, absolute darkness that is not simply very dark, but is categorically different from any darkness that exists in the lit world. The darkness in which your hand, held directly in front of your face, is not dim or obscure, but genuinely invisible, as if it were not there. The darkness in which the boundary between your body and the surrounding space seems to dissolve, because the visual information that normally defines that boundary is completely absent. That quality, taken to its ultimate extreme, amplified beyond anything a cave can produce, extended through a depth of space that makes any cave seem shallow. That was Erebus. Living darkness, not metaphorical, not symbolic, an actual presence in the deep places of the world, as real as Gaia and as fundamental to the structure of existence. And then Nyx, the night, not the night sky with its stars and its gradations of darkness and the slow turning of constellations, not the hours between sunset and sunrise, which are filled with reflected light and animal sound and the constant evidence of a world that does not fully stop. Night itself, the oldest, deepest, most fundamental form of darkness. Night as a conscious being, night as a goddess, night as a presence so ancient and so powerful that even the greatest gods of the later age approached her domain with something that looked very much like respect and sometimes looked like fear. There is a story that will come much later in this mythology, after Zeus has won his wars and taken his throne and established himself as the undisputed king of the divine world. A story in which Zeus, the most powerful being alive, comes to the edge of Nyx's domain and stops, turns back, not because he lacks the power to enter, but because he looks into that ancient dark and feels the weight of what is there, the age of it, the depth of it, the sense that he is standing at the border of something that was old before he was born, that will be old after he is gone, that operates according to principles that his power, however vast, does not govern and cannot override. Zeus turned back from Nyx, the king of gods, the lord of lightning, the being who had overthrown the Titans and divided the world with his brothers. Turned back from the night. That is the measure of what Nyx was. She was old in the way that the dark between stars is old. Old in the way that the silence before sound was old. Old in the way that everything which precedes everything else is old, with an antiquity that makes all subsequent age seem recent. She had been there, in some form, as part of chaos, before chaos differentiated itself into distinct things. The night does not begin when the sun goes down. The night was always there. The day is an interruption in the night. The light is the visitor. The dark is the host. Nyx and Erebus came together, the two oldest shadows in creation joining. And from their union came two children whose existence seems, at first, impossible. Ether, the bright upper air, the luminous atmosphere above the clouds. Light, born from the union of darkness and night. And Hemera, day, warm and golden and alive, born from the oldest night there ever was. Day is the child of night. Light is the offspring of darkness. The ancient Greeks placed this at the very beginning of their story because they believed it was one of the most important truths about the structure of existence. Everything bright comes from something dark. Every dawn is the child of the night before it. Every clarity is born from confusion. Every moment of light carries within it the memory and the ancestry of the darkness from which it came. Do not be afraid of the dark. The light comes from it. It always has. These were the first five. Gaia, the solid ground. Tartarus, the unfathomable depth. Eros, the force that draws things together. Erebus, the living darkness. And Nyx, the ancient night. From these five, and from their children and their children's children, Everything else would eventually come. The gods, the titans, the heroes, the monsters, the wars, the loves, the tragedies, the transformations, all of it. But that all begins with this. With 5 things emerging from chaos into a universe that was just beginning to understand what it was. Nyx and Erebus came together. Night and darkness. The 2 oldest shadows in creation. The 2 most fundamental forms of the absence of light. Joining in the way that ancient forces join. Not through ceremony or decision, but through the simple gravitational logic of things that belong together finding each other. And from their union came children. 2 children whose existence, when you first encounter it, seems like a contradiction, a paradox, an impossibility that the mythology offers without apology, as if daring you to sit with the strangeness of it rather than explaining it away. From night and darkness came Aether and Hemera. Light and day. Aether was the bright upper air, not the air we breathe, not the atmosphere that presses against our skin and fills our lungs. That air, the air of the lower world, was common and mixed and full of weather. Clouds formed in it, and storms moved through it, and the breath of every living creature mingled with it. That was ordinary air. Aether was something else. Aether was the pure, radiant atmosphere that existed above all of that. Above the clouds, above the weather, above the reach of anything earthly or mortal. The air of the divine realm. The substance that the gods breathed and moved through. Crystalline and luminous and charged with a quality that ordinary air did not possess. The air of the heights where the sky was always clear and the stars were always visible and the light was always clean and direct, unfiltered by the haze and moisture of the lower world. When the ancient Greeks imagined the home of the gods, they placed it in this upper air, not on the physical peak of Mount Olympus, though they pointed to that mountain when they spoke of the divine home, but above it, in the ether, in the pure bright atmosphere that existed beyond the reach of clouds and wind and all the turbulent conditions that characterized the lower sky. Ether was the medium through which divine light moved, not the source of that light, not the generator of brightness, but the substance in which brightness lived most fully and moved most freely. The way water is the medium in which fish live, the environment that allows their particular form of existence. Ether was the medium in which divine radiance existed. The air that did not dilute or obstruct or color the light that moved through it, but carried it perfectly, purely, from its source to wherever it needed to go. And ether was the child of night. This is the detail that the mythology insists on and that rewards careful thought. Not the child of some prior light source, not the product of something already bright. The child of night, the offspring of the oldest darkness, brightness born directly from the womb of the dark. The Greeks were pointing at something about the nature of light that we still recognize when we think about it carefully. Light is not the default state of things. Darkness is the default state. The universe, in its vast majority, is dark. The stars that light the sky are islands of brightness in an ocean of dark so immense that the brightness barely registers against it. The light we experience, the sunlight that defines our days and makes our world visible, is borrowed. It comes from a star, and the star will eventually exhaust itself, and the light will end, and the darkness that was always waiting will return. Light is always born from darkness. It is always temporary. It is always extraordinary, in the literal sense of being outside the ordinary condition of things. Ether, the divine bright air, is the child of night because brightness is always the offspring of the dark that preceded it. The ancient Greeks knew this. They built it into their genealogy of the gods. They placed it at the beginning of the story, before Zeus, before the Olympians, before the great wars and the great loves and all the drama of the divine world. At the very foundation, in the second generation of beings to emerge from chaos, they put this truth. Darkness comes first. Light is its child. And then Hemera, day, not the sun. Helios, the god of the sun, came later in a different lineage. Hemera was something prior to the sun, something more fundamental than the astronomical body that generates daylight. Hemera was the quality of day itself, the brightness that fills the world when the sun is present, the lived experience of a day as opposed to the physical mechanism that produces it. Hemera was day as a being, day as a presence, day as something that arrived and departed on its own terms, that had its own agency and its own nature, that was not simply the side effect of the sun being above the horizon, but a force in its own right, with its own character and its own relationship to the world it illuminated. The ancient Greeks described Hemera and Nyx as alternating. When Nyx spread her dark cloak over the world and day withdrew, night reigned. When Hemera returned and spread her brightness, night withdrew. Mother and daughter, taking turns in an eternal rotation, not opposed to each other in the way we often imagine light and darkness to be opposed, as if they were enemies, as if the arrival of one were the defeat of the other, but continuous, connected, each one making the other possible and meaningful. Day without night would not be day. It would simply be the permanent state of things, featureless and unnoticed. We recognize daylight as daylight because it follows darkness. We value the brightness of morning because we have been through the dark of night. The alternation is what makes each of them real, what gives each of them meaning. Hemera and Nyx, daughter and mother, light and dark, were not opposites but partners in the rhythm that organized all of time. Think about what the arrival of day meant in the ancient world. Not the arrival of sunlight, not the turning on of a light switch, not the convenient transition between sleeping and working. The actual, physical, sensory experience of darkness giving way to light. It begins before the sun appears. Long before sunrise, the sky in the east begins to change. The absolute black of the deep night sky softens to a deep blue, then lightens further, then takes on a warmth at the horizon that spreads upward and outward as if the sky itself were being lit from below. And then the colors appear. The first colors of the world after hours of dark. The green of trees suddenly visible. The colors of flowers. The textures of stone and soil emerging from the darkness that had flattened everything into shadow. This is Hemera arriving. This is day asserting her presence. This is the child of night spreading her brightness across a world that has been waiting for her. The Greeks personified this as a goddess because it felt like a being. It felt like an arrival, like something that came and went on its own terms, like something with intention and agency. Every morning was Hemera choosing to appear. Every evening was Hemera withdrawing. The day was not a physical process but a divine one, governed by a being who was ancient, who was the daughter of the night itself, who was luminous and alive and real. She was the first daily return, the first proof that what had gone would come back. Every morning that the world has ever known, every sunrise that has ever been witnessed by any creature with eyes to see, was Hemera making her appearance. Born from night, returning from night, and departing back into night when the day was done. This cycle, this alternation of day and night, daughter and mother, light and dark, is the most basic rhythm in the world, the rhythm against which all other rhythms are measured, the original beat of existence. And it began here, in the second generation of things, when night and darkness came together, and their children came out into a world that was still very young and had not yet learned what it would become. Aether above, carrying the divine light. Hemera below, filling the world with day. Both of them born from the same source. Both of them children of the oldest dark. Both of them proof of the principle that the mythology places at the very foundation of its understanding of the world. Everything bright comes from something dark. Every light is born from the night that preceded it. And every night ends, eventually, in the day that is always coming. Gaia was alone, the oldest being in existence, the first solid thing, the foundation beneath everything that would ever exist. And she was alone in the way that only the first aware being in creation could be alone. Not alone because others had left. Not alone because circumstances had separated her from companions she once had. Alone because there were no others. She was the only one. The only awareness in a universe that had just barely begun to be a universe. There is no word adequate to that kind of loneliness. Human loneliness, however acute, however total it feels in the worst moments, is always the loneliness of a being who exists in a world full of other beings. Even the most isolated human alive shares a planet with billions of others. Even in the deepest solitude, the evidence of other lives is everywhere. The sky above has been looked at by other eyes. The ground underfoot has been walked on by other feet. The language in which loneliness is felt was built by other minds. Gaia had none of that. She was the first. Before her, nothing aware had existed. She had no predecessors whose presence she could feel even in absence. She had no language, because language requires others to have built it with you. She had only the raw fact of her own awareness, and the equally raw fact that nothing else shared it. What she did with that loneliness is the most important act in the history of creation. She created, without a partner, without assistance, without asking permission from any force in the universe, because she was the foundation of the universe and required no permission. Gaia simply decided that something should exist above her, something to match her, something that would look at her from above as she looked upward from below. And she made it. Uranus, the sky. She stretched him above herself in all directions. Not placed him there, not positioned him like an object being arranged in a space. Stretched him. The word suggests something more intimate than construction, more organic than architecture, as if the sky were an extension of herself, grown outward from her own substance into the space above her, reaching in all directions simultaneously until it covered her completely, from horizon to horizon, touching her at every edge. She made him to be her equal. This is the detail the mythology insists on. Not a servant, not a decoration, not a tool, an equal, a companion, a being of the same fundamental order as herself, capable of the same awareness, possessing the same depth of presence, able to look at her and truly see her in the way that only an equal can truly see another. Sky above, earth below, the two great presences that define existence for every creature that has ever lived on this planet. You are always between them. Every moment of your life, every waking hour, and every sleeping hour, you have been between Gaia below and Uranus above. They are the frame within which everything happens, the floor and ceiling of the world. But Uranus was not simply a ceiling. He was a conscious being who was the sky. Every cloud was part of his body. He felt weather moving through him the way you feel blood moving through your veins. He felt rain falling from him as a giving, a release of something held and then offered. He felt the sun crossing him each day as a warmth that was borrowed rather than his own, passing through him on its way from east to west. He felt the stars embedded in him like lights set into a vast dark surface, moving through him in their nightly courses, each one known to him, each one part of what he was. And he felt Gaia below him, always, the earth beneath the sky, the ground that met him at every horizon, the solid reality that defined the lower boundary of his existence the way he defined the upper boundary of hers. Between them, everything that could live, everything that could exist in the way that mortal and divine things exist, had its home. Gaia had made him from loneliness. She had made him to be with her. In making him, she had created the first relationship, the first pairing, the first sense of two distinct beings who knew each other and whose existence was completed by the existence of the other. The world before Uranus was a world with a ground but no sky, with a surface but nothing above it, with presence but no perspective from above. Uranus completed what Gaia had begun by simply being. Then Gaia made the mountains, great stone peaks rising from her own body, not added to her surface from outside, not placed on top of her like objects arranged on a table, growing from within her, pushed upward by her own internal force, reaching toward the sky she had made. This is significant. The mountains were not separate from Gaia. They were her own substance, shaped by her own will, expressed as vertical stone reaching toward the companion she had created above. The mountains were Gaia's ambition made physical, her longing expressed in geology, the ground deciding to reach for the sky. In Greece, the land from which this mythology came, mountains are everywhere. Greece is one of the most mountainous countries in Europe. From almost any point in the country, mountains are visible. They crowd the landscape, cutting it into small valleys and isolated plains and coastlines backed by dramatic stone peaks. The sea is rarely out of sight, but neither are the mountains. The two dominant features of the Greek landscape are stone rising and water spreading, mountains and sea, the vertical and the horizontal, the reaching and the settling. The ancient Greeks looked at their mountains, and they saw the places where earth came closest to sky, where the two great presences that defined existence nearly touched. The peak of a high mountain disappears into cloud. The cloud is part of the sky. For a moment, on a peak high enough, you are in both worlds simultaneously. The ground beneath your feet and the sky around your body. Earth and Uranus almost meeting. The Greeks placed their gods on mountains because mountains were the meeting place. Not on the top of the mountain, exactly, but above it, in the clear air above the peak, in the ether. But the mountain was the approach, the last earthly thing before the divine began, the point where the ambition of the ground had carried it as far as it could go. Every mountain in Greece was sacred to something. Every peak had its association, its story, its resident divine presence. Because every mountain was a place where the earth had reached toward the sky and come closer than anywhere else. Every mountain was Gaia's attempt to close the distance between herself and the sky she had made. And then Gaia made the sea. Pontus, the ancient name for the first ocean, a word that meant simply the sea, as if there were no need for further description, as if the fact of the sea were so overwhelming that naming it was sufficient. She made it alone, as she had made everything else. No partner, No assistance. She willed the low places between her mountains to fill with something deep and dark and wild. Something that would be as ungovernable as the mountains were solid. Something that would move constantly, restlessly, in contrast to the patient permanence of stone. The sea. Every civilization that has ever existed near it has understood simultaneously that the sea is the source of life and the agent of death. It provides food. It enables trade and travel and the connection of distant peoples. It moderates the climate, storing the sun's heat and releasing it slowly, making coastal regions warmer in winter and cooler in summer than they would otherwise be. Without the sea, the world would be harsher, more extreme, less habitable. The sea also kills. Without warning, without pattern, without mercy or logic or any relationship to the virtue or innocence of those it takes. A storm builds faster than any ship can outrun it. A wave arrives with no predecessor. The sea that was calm at dawn can be murderous by midday. Every civilization that has lived near it has lost people to it, has learned to fear it even while depending on it, has developed prayers and rituals and offerings designed to appease something that cannot actually be appeased because it is not angry, it is simply the sea. Gaia made this. She made something that was simultaneously the greatest provider and the greatest danger. Not accidentally, not as a design flaw. The sea's capacity to give and its capacity to take are the same capacity, seen from different moments. The same depth that holds fish enough to feed a people holds the darkness that swallows ships. The same reach that connects distant shores is the reach that extends beyond any sailor's ability to know where they are. The same freedom that makes the sea the highway of the ancient world makes it the place where the rules of the land do not apply. Gaia made the sea complete, with its generosity and its violence, with its beauty and its indifference, with its gift of connection and its gift of annihilation. She made it as she made everything, honestly, fully, without softening the difficult parts. The world she was building was not going to be comfortable. It was going to be real. Now the world had its essential shape. The ground of Gaia, the sky of Uranus, the mountains where Earth reached toward sky, the sea filling the low places, wild and deep and necessary. The frame of everything that would happen next was in place. And the two great beings who had made it, or rather the one who had made everything and the one who had been made, looked at what existed between them and found it sufficient to begin. What came next was children, many children, children who would fill the world they had been given and eventually fight over it and change it beyond recognition. But that is the next part of the story. For now, the world had a ground and a sky and mountains and a sea. That was enough. That was the beginning of everything. Gaia and Uranus came together. Earth and sky, the ground and the heavens. The first relationship in creation, joining in the way that rain joins the earth, the way morning mist rises from the ground and returns to the clouds. The way the horizon, where earth meets sky, seems to follow you as you move, always just ahead, always at the boundary between the two realms. And their union produced children, 12 of them, 6 brothers and 6 sisters, the first great family of divine beings, ancient and vast and powerful in ways that strain the capacity of ordinary language to describe. These were the Titans. The word itself is ancient, older than the mythology that used it, borrowed from some prior culture whose name has been lost. Its exact meaning is uncertain. Some scholars connect it to a word meaning to stretch, suggesting beings of vast reach. Others connect it to a word meaning to strain or to suffer. Others still see in it a connection to words for honor and dignity. Perhaps all of these meanings are present at once. The Titans were vast. They did suffer, and they carried a dignity that came from being the oldest gods in the world. To understand what a Titan was, you have to let go of human scale entirely. A Titan was not simply a very large person, not simply a very powerful being. A Titan was a force of nature that had taken the shape of a person, an ocean current that could speak, a mountain range that could think, the turning of seasons given a face and a voice and a will. Each of them embodied something so fundamental about the structure of the world that their existence was less like the existence of an individual and more like the existence of a law of nature. They were what the world was made of before the world knew it was made of anything. 12 of them. Let us meet each one. The eldest was Oceanus. In the understanding of the ancient Greeks, the world was a disk, a flat circle of land and sea, surrounded on all sides by a vast river that encircled everything. Not a river in the modern sense, not a thin line of water moving through a landscape, but the boundary of the world, the edge of everything, the place where the known ended and the unknown began. This was Oceanus, not a god who ruled a river. The river itself, given awareness. The boundary of existence made conscious. Every ancient Greek who stood at the western edge of the known world, at the Strait of Gibraltar, which they called the Pillars of Heracles, and looked out at the open Atlantic, was standing at the edge of Oceanus. Beyond that point, the world gave way to something else, something that sailors who went too far did not return from, the deep water that had no other shore, or none that anyone had found. Oceanus was that limit made flesh, the line where the familiar becomes the strange, the point where the maps of the known world gave way to the blank spaces that cartographers filled with warnings and with monsters. Here there be dragons, as the later maps would say. Here there be Oceanus. But Oceanus was not a threatening presence. Of all the Titans, he was perhaps the most neutral, the most removed from the conflicts and the dramas that would come. He would not fight in the great war between Titans and Olympians. He would simply flow, as he had always flowed, encircling the world, maintaining the boundary, being the edge. Some things are so fundamental to the structure of existence that they cannot take sides. Oceanus was one of those things. The boundary of the world does not fight for one version of the world over another. It simply is the edge, regardless of what happens within it. He was vast in the way that only the concept of a world's edge can be vast. His body was the river that touched every shore and bordered every sea. Every coast in the ancient world was, in some sense, his coast. Every beach where the land ended and the water began was his water. He was everywhere that the known world stopped being the known world. He was the place where certainty became uncertainty, where the familiar became the strange, where the world you understood gave way to the world you could only imagine. Oceanus married his sister Tethys. Tethys was the goddess of fresh water, the rivers and springs and underground streams that made life on land possible, the water that you could drink, the water that grew the grain, the water that filled the wells and fed the fountains and ran in clear cold streams down from the mountains into the plains where people lived and farmed. Without salt water, there is no rain. The sun heats the ocean, water evaporates, rises, forms clouds, moves inland, falls as rain. Without rain, there is no fresh water. Without fresh water, there is no life on land. Everything that lives above the sea depends, ultimately, on the cycle that moves water from salt to fresh and back again. Oceanus and Tethys together embodied this cycle. The salt water and the fresh water, the ocean and the river, the boundary and the gift. Between them, they governed the complete movement of water through the world. They were said to have 3,000 sons, 3,000 river gods, one for every river in the world. The Nile and the Tiber and the Euphrates and the Rhine and all the nameless streams and rivulets that cut their paths through every landscape in the known world. Each one a child of Tethys and Oceanus. Each one a divine presence inhabiting a specific body of water. And 3,000 daughters, the Oceanids, the nymphs of the ocean and its tributaries. Divine beings who lived in the springs and the sea and the great rivers, who were the living spirit of those waters. Every spring that a Greek traveler drank from had a name and a face and a divine parent. The water was not simply water. It was someone. It belonged to someone. And you drank it as a guest of that someone, with all the obligations that ancient hospitality entailed. This personalization of water, this insistence that every body of water was a conscious being with a history and relationships and a place in the divine family tree, was not simply poetic decoration. It was a way of relating to the natural world that carried moral weight. You do not simply use a river. You interact with it. You are in relationship with it. The river has given you something, and that gift creates an obligation. This is how the ancient Greeks understood their world, not as a collection of resources to be used, but as a community of beings to be related to. Tethys and Oceanus were the parents of that community, the source from which all the waters of the world flowed. Hyperion was the Titan of light. His name meant the one who travels above, or the one who watches from on high. Before Apollo drove his golden chariot across the sky, before the sun had the particular character and mythology that later generations would give it, there was Hyperion, the original light, the primal radiance that preceded all the specific forms that divine light would eventually take. Hyperion was not the sun in the later sense. He was something prior to the sun. He was the fact of celestial light before that light had been given a specific story, a specific god, a specific daily journey with a beginning and an end. He was the light that exists in the sky simply because the sky has always had light in it, the background radiance of the heavens, the luminosity that makes the sky rather than simply darkness above the earth. He moved above everything, as his name suggested. He traveled the paths of the celestial bodies, governing their courses, ensuring that the lights of the sky followed the routes they were supposed to follow. Before there were specific gods for the sun and the moon and the dawn, Hyperion held all of that light in himself, undifferentiated, primordial, ancient. He married his sister Thea, whose name meant the Divine One or the Shining One. Thea was the Titaness of sight and of the things that shone. She governed the quality of shining itself, the property that bright things had of reflecting or generating light in a way that caught the eye, that demanded attention, that made the beholder stop and look. Gold shone with Thea's quality. The stars shone with it. The surface of the sea on a calm, bright day shone with it. Everything luminous in the world expressed something of her. From Hyperion and Thea came 3 children who would illuminate every day that the world has ever known. Helios, the sun, who would drive his golden chariot from east to west across the sky each day. The horses of the sun pulling the blazing wheel of light across the heavens, bringing the day that his grandmother Hemera had prepared. Selene, the moon, who would pull her silver chariot across the night sky, the cool and reflected light of the moon measuring the months. governing the tides, lighting the nights enough to make travel possible, not enough to make darkness disappear. And Eos, the dawn, the rosy-fingered goddess who preceded her brother each morning, who opened the gates of the sky for him to enter, who painted the horizon with the colors that announced his coming before he arrived. Sun reflected light, and the threshold between night and day. The three illuminations of the ancient world, all of them the grandchildren of chaos, through the lineage of night and darkness, through Aether and Hemera, through Hyperion and Theia. Light always born from darkness. At every generation, Theia has already entered this story as the wife of Hyperion, but she deserves her own accounting because what she represented was more than simply the mother of three luminous children. Theia was the Titaness of sight, not simply of light, but of the capacity to perceive light, of the ability of eyes to receive what shines and translate it into the experience of seeing. Without Theia, there could be light everywhere and no one would see it. The photons would travel, the waves would propagate, the physical phenomenon would occur, but nothing would be experienced. Theia was the bridge between light as a physical fact and light as a lived experience. This is a subtle distinction, but an important one. The ancient Greeks were not simply cataloging the natural world when they made Theia a titan. They were recognizing that light and the perception of light are two different things. That the universe could, in principle, be full of light that no one experienced. And that the gift of sight, the capacity to receive light and make meaning from it, was itself something that required a source and a name and a place in the divine order. Theia also governed the quality of divine radiance. The specific shininess of gold, which the Greeks associated with divine things, was her quality. When you saw gold gleaming in the light and felt something respond in you to that gleaming, when the brightness of the metal seemed to carry a charge that ordinary brightness did not carry, you were experiencing something of Theia. The gods shone, divine things shone. The quality of that shining was hers. Ceus was the titan of the celestial axis and of rational intelligence. The celestial axis was a concept of fundamental importance to ancient astronomy. The stars, observed from any point on Earth over the course of a night, appear to rotate around a single fixed point in the northern sky. What we now call the pole star is the star closest to this fixed point. Everything else in the sky revolves around it. The celestial axis is the imaginary line running from this fixed point down through the center of the Earth to the corresponding point in the southern sky. It is the pivot of the heavens, the point of stillness around which all visible motion occurs. Ceus embodied this axis. He was the still center of the turning sky, the point that did not move while everything else moved. And in this he represented something philosophically important, the idea that amid all the flux and change and motion of the world, there is something fixed, something that does not change, a reference point against which all motion can be measured and understood. His name also connected him to questioning, to the kind of rational inquiry that seeks to understand rather than simply observe. Ceus was not just the axis, but the intelligence that understood the axis, the mind that could look at the turning sky and discern the principle behind the turning, the capacity for systematic thought that the Greeks would later identify as one of their highest values. His wife was Phoebe. Together, they were the grandparents of Apollo and Artemis. The line from cosmic intelligence and lunar radiance to the twin gods of reason and wildness, of music and the hunt, of civilization and nature, runs directly from Ceus and Phoebe. From the still center of reason and the reflected light of the moon became the two great forces that defined the poles of the Greek divine world. Phoebe was the Titaness of the prophetic mind and of the moon. Her name meant bright and shining, and she was associated with the moon in its earlier pre-Selene conception, before Selene was given the moon as her specific domain, before the moon became the province of a particular goddess with a particular story. The moon's light belonged to Phoebe, the original lunar brightness, the silver light that distinguished the night sky from absolute darkness and made travel and navigation possible after the sun had set. But Phoebe was also associated with prophecy and the oracular tradition. This connection between the moon and prophetic knowledge was ancient and widespread, not unique to the Greeks. The moon's phases were among the first things that early humans observed and tracked, because the moon provided a reliable and visible measure of time, and because certain patterns, the behavior of tides, the timing of certain natural events, seemed to correlate with its phases. The observation of the moon was an early form of the observation of the natural world in search of patterns. And the search for patterns in nature is, in a certain sense, what prophecy does. It looks for regularities in the flow of events and uses them to say something about what will come next. Phoebe held both of these capacities, the light that made the night navigable and the intelligence that made the future readable. Both of them gifts that the lunar cycle, faithfully observed, could offer to those who paid attention. Her granddaughter Artemis would inherit the lunar association. Her grandson Apollo would inherit the prophetic one. And at Delphi, the most sacred oracle site in the ancient world, the tradition said that the site had originally been a place of prophecy presided over by Phoebe before it passed to Apollo. The deep roots of the Delphic oracle ran all the way back to this Titaness of the shining moon. Themis was divine law, not human law, not the laws that legislatures pass and courts interpret and citizens sometimes follow and sometimes do not. Not the laws that change when the political winds change or when a new king comes to power with different priorities. The law that holds the universe together. The law that precedes all human lawmaking and upon which all human lawmaking, at its best, is an attempt to build. The seasons change in their proper order. That is Themis. Fire is hot. That is Themis. Every action has consequences. That is Themis. The living die. That is Themis. The things that are right and the things that are wrong in a way that no human power can reclassify. That remains true regardless of what any court or any king decides. That is Themis. The ancient Greeks believed that beneath all human law there was a deeper structure, a cosmic order that human beings discovered rather than invented. Their best laws were attempts to align human behavior with this cosmic order. Their worst laws were departures from it, and the consequences of those departures were inevitable, not because some divine power enforced them, but because the order itself enforced itself. Departure from Themis generated consequences that brought things back into alignment, whether any being willed it or not. She was the most abstract of the Titans in some ways, the least personal, the furthest from anything that could be called a character in a story. But she was also the most foundational. Without Themis, nothing else in the mythology would make sense. The idea that the Titans' imprisonment was wrong. The idea that Kronos deserved to be overthrown. The idea that Zeus's rule was legitimate. All of these claims rested on an appeal to something deeper than power, something that Themis embodied. She would later sit beside Zeus as his counselor, the most powerful god and the divine law that even the most powerful god was subject to. Even Zeus could not simply do whatever he wished. Themis was there to remind him of what was right regardless of what was possible. Mnemosyne was memory, not the faculty of memory, not the biological process by which the brain stores and retrieves information, but memory as a fundamental force in the structure of existence. The power that preserves the past, the capacity that prevents everything that happens from simply vanishing the moment it is over, as if it had never been. Without memory, there is no identity. You would not know from moment to moment who you were, or where you came from, or what you had learned, or who you loved. Every moment would be your first moment. Every face would be a stranger's face. The self is not a thing that exists in the present. The self is a story, a continuous narrative that connects the present to the past and projects it toward the future. That narrative is memory. Without it, there is no self. Without memory, there is no learning. Every mistake would be made for the first time, forever. Every skill would be lost as soon as you stopped practicing it. Every insight would dissolve the moment it was achieved. The accumulated wisdom of a life, all the hard-won understanding that comes from years of experience, would be unavailable to the being who lived that life. Without memory, there is no culture, no art, because art is the making permanent of experiences that would otherwise be lost. No science, because science is the accumulation of observations made over generations. No civilization, because civilization is the project of building on what previous generations built, which requires knowing what they built. Mnemosyne was the force that held all of this in place, the force that said, "This happened, and it will not simply disappear." She was the mother of the 9 muses, the goddesses of every art. Epic poetry and lyric poetry and history and music and dance and comedy and tragedy and astronomy and the art of persuasion. All of them her daughters. All of them born from memory. Because all art is an act of memory. All creation is the refusal to let something be forgotten. Crius was the titan of the constellations, specifically the constellations of the southern sky that the ancient Greeks associated with the turning of the seasons and the measurement of the year. He was among the least prominent of the 12 in terms of his own mythology, appearing mostly as a father and a participant in the genealogies rather than as a central figure in any specific story. But his domain was important. The constellations were not simply decorative for the ancient Greeks. They were a calendar. The rising and setting of specific star groups marked the seasons, indicated the right times for planting and harvesting, told sailors when it was safe to be at sea and when the dangerous autumn storms made sailing inadvisable. Crius governed this celestial calendar, the orderly progression of star groups across the sky through the year, the reliability of Orion appearing in the winter sky and Scorpius in the summer, of the Pleiades rising at plowing time and setting at harvest, of the regularities that made agricultural and maritime life predictable enough to sustain civilization. His son Astraeus would marry Eos, the dawn, and from their union would come the stars themselves, the winds, and the planets. The wind gods that govern the 4 directions and the intermediate directions. The morning star that preceded the sun. All of them the grandchildren of Crius, through the lineage of the sky's ordered movement. Iapetus was the titan of mortal lifespan and of craftsmanship in the human sense. His name has been connected to words meaning to wound or to pierce, associations that connect him to mortality, to the fact that mortal lives end, to the wound that time inflicts on every living thing by counting down its days from the moment of its birth. He was the titan whose lineage would produce the beings most directly involved in the fate of humanity. His sons were 4, and each of them would play a central role in the stories that followed. Atlas, who after the defeat of the Titans would be condemned to hold the sky on his shoulders for eternity. Not Tartarus for Atlas, but something in some ways more isolating. To stand forever at the edge of the world with the weight of the heavens pressing down, unable to put it down, unable to leave, unable to share the burden. A punishment shaped perfectly to the nature of the offense. The Titans' attempt to hold up their own power against the new order, reflected in one Titan holding up the sky itself. Prometheus, whose name meant forethought, who would become the most tragic and in some ways the most admirable figure in the entire mythology. The Titan who looked at the human race and saw their vulnerability and made a choice that would cost him everything. His story is one we will tell in full in a later episode. For now, it is enough to know that he came from here, from Iapetus, from the lineage of mortality and craft. Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, the brother of Prometheus, who would make a catastrophic error of judgment that changed the human world forever. And Menoetius, the proud and violent one, who would be struck down by Zeus's lightning and cast into the darkness of Tartarus. These 4 sons of Iapetus would touch every aspect of the human condition: the burden of the world, the theft of fire, the release of every ill, the punishment of pride. All of it rooted in this one Titan, standing at the edge of the divine family, looking toward the mortal world that his descendants would shape. Rhea was the great mother Titan. Her name is ancient and its meaning debated, but she was associated with the flow of things, the flow of time, the flow of generations from one to the next, the flow of life through its forms, constantly changing, constantly moving, never the same from one moment to the next. She was the earth in its dynamic aspect, not the static ground that Gaia represented, but the ground in motion, the earth as it changes through seasons, as it supports and releases and supports again the endless procession of living things. She was the maternal principle in its most active sense. Not motherhood as a fixed condition, but motherhood as a force, the kind of motherhood that does not cling, that does not hold its children in place, but sends them out into the world and then, when the world turns against them, finds a way to protect them by any means necessary. She would need that quality more than she could have imagined, because she was destined to marry Kronos. And her marriage to Kronos would test her in a way that nothing in the mythology tests any other being quite so completely. She would have her children taken from her, one by one, swallowed by a husband too afraid to let the future arrive. She would hold her grief in silence for an age, and then she would act, with patience and with cunning and with the absolute determination of a mother who has decided that enough is enough. Rhea is one of the most important and least celebrated figures in Greek mythology. She is often mentioned only in relation to her children and to the trick she played on Kronos with the stone. But she was a Titan, as old as the mountains, as powerful as the turning of the seasons. And what she did, the choice she made to seek out Gaia and follow her plan and save her 6th child, changed everything. And last, the youngest, Kronos, the youngest of the 12 Titans. And in the tradition of Greek mythology, as in many world traditions, the youngest is often the most significant, the last-born, the one who comes after all the others have established themselves and finds a different path, the one who changes things. Kronos was the most cunning of the Titans, not the strongest, not the oldest, not the most obviously powerful, the most cunning, the one who could look at a situation and strip away the emotional and the habitual and the comfortable and see the underlying logic of it. The one whose mind worked fastest and most clearly under pressure. He was also the most dangerous, not because of malice, not because he was evil in any simple sense, but because of the combination of intelligence and fear. Kronos was a being who thought clearly and felt deeply, and was capable of acting on what he thought and felt with a decisiveness that the other Titans lacked. When his mother asked which of her children was brave enough to do what must be done, and all the others looked away, Kronos looked at his mother and said yes. That yes would make him the ruler of the world. It would also make him a tyrant. Not because power corrupts, not simply because of that old truth, though that truth is present here too, but because of 3 words that he would hear after he had done what he needed to do. 3 words that would enter him and grow. 3 words that would take the most powerful being alive and reduce him, in the end, to a man swallowing stones in the dark. By your own child. Those words were still in the future when Kronos was born. He was young. He was the youngest. And the world that he would inherit, after he did what no one else would do, was still ahead of him. But the words were coming. Everything that follows comes from the fact that those words were coming, and that Kronos, when they came, could not bear them. Gaia and Uranus were not finished. The 12 Titans had been born, vast and ancient, and each of them embodying something fundamental about the structure of the world. They were extraordinary by any measure. They were more than enough to fill the world with divine power and divine presence. But Gaia was still creating. The universe was still assembling itself. And what came next was different from the Titans in ways that would prove consequential for everything that followed. 3 more children came from Gaia and Uranus. 3 brothers, named Brontes, Sterapes, and Argesh. Thunder, lightning, and brightness. And each of them had, set in the center of their forehead, a single enormous eye. Before anything else is said about the Cyclopes, the most important thing to establish is what they were not. They were not the creature from Homer's Odyssey. That Cyclops, Polyphemus, the cave-dwelling giant who herded sheep and ate sailors and was blinded by a sharpened stake, was a very distant descendant of these 3, separated by many generations and almost nothing in common except the single eye. The difference between Polyphemus and Brontes, Sterapes, and Argesh is the difference between a candle and a lightning strike. They share a lineage and almost nothing else. The original Cyclopes were craftsmen, master craftsmen, the greatest craftsmen who have ever existed or ever will exist. Their single eye was not a deformity or a limitation. It was an instrument of extraordinary precision, a specific and divine form of vision that allowed them to perceive the internal structure of things, not just surfaces, not just what materials looked like from the outside, but the grain of metal, the stressed lines in stone, the hidden architecture of physical substances, the precise composition of alloys and elements that no other being could perceive from the outside. This is the vision of a master, the sculptor who can look at a block of marble and see the form already inside it, the metalsmith who can look at an ingot and understand exactly where to strike and how to shape. Taken to its absolute divine extreme, applied to materials that existed nowhere else in creation, this is what made the Cyclopes what they were. They could see what things were made of and what they could become. Their hands were the necessary complement to their eyes. The same hands that could shift boulders could also perform the most delicate acts of shaping, could work divine metal into forms of impossible intricacy, could produce objects of such precise construction that they functioned in ways that nothing else in creation could match. Brontes, thunder, In him the quality of the crack that splits the air and reverberates through the earth, the sound that arrives without warning and is impossible to ignore, the violence that is over before you have processed that it began. He could work with materials that embodied that quality, that sudden, total, overwhelming release of force. Erebus, lightning. In him the quality of the bolt that moves faster than thought, that exists and then is gone, that leaves its mark on everything it touches. The instantaneous, the precise, the thing that goes exactly where it goes and nowhere else. He could shape energy into form with the same precision that lightning demonstrates when it finds the highest point and strikes it. Argesh, brightness. In him the quality of the flash that bleaches everything white for a fraction of a second, that reveals what darkness conceals, that makes everything visible at once, without shadow, without gradation, everything equally exposed in the same instant. He could work with light itself as a material, could understand its properties with his single eye in ways that no other being could. Together, the three of them would create the three greatest weapons in the history of the divine world. The lightning bolt of Zeus, which concentrated the force of the entire atmosphere into something that could be held and thrown. The trident of Poseidon, which gave its wielder the ability to direct the force of the ocean and the Earth's tectonic structure. And the helmet of invisibility worn by Hades, which removed its wearer from the plane of perception entirely, made them not merely hidden, but genuinely absent to the senses of everyone around them. These weapons did not yet exist when the Cyclopes were born. The war that would require them had not yet happened. Zeus had not yet been born. The age of the Titans was still ahead. But the capacity was there, in those three brothers with their burning eyes and their extraordinary hands, from the very first moment of their existence. The universe had made exactly the craftsmen that the future would need, before the future had announced what it needed. Uranus looked at them, and felt afraid. After the Cyclopes came their brothers, three more sons of Gaia and Uranus. But where the Cyclopes were beings of craft and precision, these three were beings of something else entirely. Their name was the Centimanes, the hundred-handed ones. Cottus, Briareus, Gyges, each with 50 heads, each with 100 hands. The number 100 is not metaphorical here, not a poetic way of saying very many. 100, specific, countable. 100 individual hands on a single body, each hand as large and as strong as the hand of a Titan, each hand capable of independent action, all of them coordinated by 50 minds working in perfect simultaneous awareness. To understand what this means, consider first what a single pair of hands is capable of. 2 hands can build a house. 2 hands can work a field. 2 hands can make a weapon, sail a ship, carry a boulder, write a poem, hold a child. 2 hands contain within them essentially the full range of human capability. Everything we have ever built or made or changed or destroyed, we built or made or changed or destroyed with 2 hands. Now multiply that by 50. 100 hands, each as capable as a pair of divine hands, each operating simultaneously. The lifting capacity alone defies any comparison. 100 hands grasping 100 boulders simultaneously. 100 boulders the size of houses, released at the same instant, in the same direction, or in 100 different directions, or in any configuration that 50 coordinated minds could devise. 3 of these beings acting together could release 300 massive projectiles simultaneously, not sequentially, not in rapid succession that might be confused with simultaneously, but at the exact same moment. 300 house-sized stones in the air at once. The mathematics of that impact is not a military calculation. It is a geological one. The kind of force that reshapes coastlines, that creates valleys, that buries mountain peaks. Cottus, the striker. His name suggested the act of striking itself, the application of force to a target, the moment of impact. He was the pure expression of what the Centimanes were at their most direct. Force applied, impact delivered, the thing that was there, and then the market left. Briareus, the vigorous, the energetic, the one whose 100 hands moved with a constant restless power, never still, always capable of the next action and the one after that. Some ancient sources called him Aegean, the sea goat, and associated him with the force of the sea in its most violent aspect. The wave that does not diminish as it approaches the shore but builds and builds until it arrives with everything it has gathered. Gyges, the long-limbed, the one whose reach exceeded even what his numbers suggested. If Cottus was the force of the blow and Briareus was its energy, Gyges was its reach. The ability to extend across distances, to encompass more than any other being could encompass, to hold simultaneously what others could only hold one at a time. The Centimanes were not beings of craft. They did not make things. What they could do was apply force on a scale that nothing else in creation could match or counter. They were the geological violence of the earth itself, given minds. Given the ability to choose where to direct that violence. Given the capacity to decide. And that last quality, the capacity to decide, the presence of mind behind the force, was perhaps the most frightening thing about them. An earthquake does not choose its target. A tsunami does not aim. A volcanic eruption does not decide which city to bury. These forces are terrifying precisely because they are indifferent. They do what they do without awareness of what they are doing. The Centimanes were aware. They looked at the world with 50 pairs of eyes each, and they understood what they saw, and they could decide what to do about it. Conscious, directed, unlimited force. There was nothing in the divine world capable of withstanding them if they chose to act. Gaia loved them, as she loved all her children, without condition, without the aesthetic preferences that only beings with limited perspective develop. She saw what they were. She saw the force in their 100 hands and the awareness in their 50 heads, and she loved them entirely. Uranus looked at them, and the fear that had already begun when he looked at the Cyclopes became something larger. Something that did not remain a feeling, but immediately began to become an action. He was the sky. He was vast and powerful and the companion of the earth herself. He had never before encountered anything that made him feel that his position was in danger. And now here were 6 beings, 3 of craft and 3 of force, whose capabilities exceeded his own in specific ways that he could not address with any power he possessed. The fear did not ask what kind of beings the Cyclopes and the Centimanes actually were. It did not wait to discover whether they were hostile or friendly, whether they would use what they had against him or simply exist alongside him, as the Titans did. Fear does not wait for evidence. Fear looks at capability and immediately translates it into threat. Uranus looked at the 6 beings his wife had borne, and he began to plan how to eliminate the danger they represented. And in doing so, he set in motion a sequence of events that would not conclude for generations. After the Cyclopes came 3 more children of Gaia and Uranus. 3 brothers, unlike anything that had come before them. Unlike anything that would come after. Their name was the Centimanes, a word that meant, simply and literally, the 100-handed ones. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. And the name was not metaphor, not poetic exaggeration, not a way of saying very strong or extraordinarily capable. Each of these three beings had 100 hands. Each had 50 heads. The numbers were precise. They were meant. To begin to understand what this means, you have to first set aside every comparison your mind will try to make. Every reference point you reach for will be insufficient. The Centimanes were not like anything else. They were not a larger version of something familiar. They were a different category of being entirely, and the only way to approach them honestly is to sit with the numbers until the numbers start to mean something. 100 hands on a single body. Start with 2. 2 hands are what every human being has, and with 2 hands human beings have built every city that has ever existed. With 2 hands they have carved stone and shaped metal and planted fields and sailed ships and written books and held their children and buried their dead. 2 hands contain within them the full range of human physical capability. Every monument, every cathedral, every bridge, every road, every object of beauty or utility that our species has ever produced was made with 2 hands. The entire built world of human civilization is the product of 2 hands, multiplied by billions of people over hundreds of thousands of years. Now hold in your mind not 2, but 100. On a single body, each hand as strong as a divine hand. Each hand capable of independent movement and independent action. Each hand fully functional and fully coordinated with the 99 others. The mind that controlled those hands, or rather the 50 minds, had to coordinate all 100 simultaneously, had to know at every moment what each hand was doing and what each hand needed to do next, had to process the information from 50 pairs of eyes and translate it into action distributed across 100 points of contact with the world. What this made possible was force on a scale that exceeded any other being in creation. In a single moment, one of the Centimanes could grasp 100 objects and release them simultaneously. Not in sequence, not in rapid succession. Simultaneously, 100 boulders leaving 100 hands at the exact same instant, traveling in any configuration that the being chose, arriving at their destinations at the same moment or staggered according to intention. 3 of these beings together could release 300 such objects at once. There is no military frame of reference for this. No comparison to any human weapon or any human army that does justice to it. The closest comparisons are geological, an eruption that sends debris across hundreds of kilometers. An earthquake that displaces entire landscapes. The kind of event that the Earth itself generates when it releases the pressure that has been building in its depths. The Centimanes were that level of force, directed by minds. Catus, the striker. His name meant the act of striking itself, not the preparation for striking, not the potential for striking. The strike, the moment of impact. The point at which force meets its target and the target is changed forever. Everything about Catus was defined by this quality of directness, of arriving, of impact. He was not the being who planned the blow or who positioned himself for it, or who calculated the optimal trajectory. He was the blow itself, given consciousness, the pure expression of force at the moment of its application. When the ancient sources describe the Centimanes in battle, it is Catus who appears most often in the accounts of the devastating strikes that turned the tide. The blow that could not be absorbed. The impact that left no possibility of recovery. The force that arrived and was simply overwhelming in its arrival. His 100 hands in the act of striking were not 100 separate blows. They were one blow, distributed across 100 points of contact, arriving at the same moment. The difference between being struck by one thing and being struck by 100 things simultaneously is not a difference of degree. It is a difference of kind. 100 simultaneous impacts are not 100 times as bad as one impact. They are something for which one impact is not even a useful reference point. Cottus was the being in whom all of that concentrated. The striker, the one whose name meant the moment everything changed. Briareus, the vigorous, the strong, the one whose energy did not diminish, whose 100 hands were always in motion, always capable of the next action and the one after that, and the one after that. Some ancient sources gave him a second name, Aegean, the sea goat, and associated him with the force of the sea in its most violent and sustained aspect. Not the single catastrophic wave, not the one terrible storm, but the sea as it sustains its violence over time. The storm that does not end, the waves that keep coming, the force that renews itself continuously rather than spending itself in a single overwhelming moment. This is what made Briareus different from his brothers in character, if not in capability. Where Cottus was the blow, Briareus was the sustained assault. The force that could not be outlasted because it did not tire. The energy that replenished itself as quickly as it was spent. The being whose 100 hands were never still, who was always in the process of doing the next thing, who had no pause between actions because all 100 hands were always in use. The sea that Aegean embodied was not calm between its storms. It was always moving, always generating, always building toward the next expression of its force. The waves that broke on the shore were not spent. They pulled back and gathered themselves and came again. The tide that receded did not abandon the shore. It was already returning. Briareus was that quality, the inexhaustible, the one who would still be throwing when the battle was over, because for him the battle was never quite over, because 100 hands never ran out of things to do. It was Briareus whom later mythology would sometimes describe as a peacemaker among the gods, a being so formidable that his presence alone could end a conflict before it escalated beyond what anyone wanted. When Poseidon and Hera and Athena were said to have once conspired against Zeus, it was Briareus whom Thetis summoned to sit beside Zeus as a bodyguard, whose mere presence ended the conspiracy before it had a chance to act. 100 hands, folded quietly in the lap, was argument enough. Gyges, the long-limbed, the one whose reach exceeded what even his numbers suggested. Where Cottus was the strike and Briareus was the sustained force, Gyges was the encompassing, the ability to extend across space, to reach what others could not reach, to encompass within his 100 hands a span of territory that would require dozens of ordinary beings to cover. His 50 heads could see in every direction simultaneously, not just forward and back and to the sides, but in all directions at once, the way a being with 50 heads mounted on a single body could orient themselves in all directions simultaneously and perceive everything within their field of awareness without having to turn, without having to choose what to look at, without having to sacrifice awareness of anything in order to attend to something else. This gave Gyges a quality of total situational awareness that no other being possessed. He missed nothing. There was no angle of approach that he could not see, no movement in his vicinity that escaped his notice, no action taken within his reach that he did not observe. 50 pairs of eyes, all feeding information to the same coordinated mind, gave him a relationship to his environment that was genuinely comprehensive. And then 100 hands to act on what 50 pairs of eyes observed. The combination of total awareness and total capability was something that even the most powerful titans could not match. You cannot surprise a being who can see in all directions. You cannot flank a being who has hands reaching in every direction. You cannot overwhelm a being whose 100 hands can meet force from any angle simultaneously. Gyges was the Centimane's answer to the problem of position. Cottus and Briareus and Gyges together covered every dimension of force. The decisive blow, the sustained assault, and the comprehensive defense. Three beings who together made something that had no weakness in any direction. Gaia looked at her three youngest sons and loved them as she loved all her children. Completely, without reservation, without the fear that Uranus would immediately feel when he looked at the same three beings and saw not children but threats. That difference between the love that Gaia felt and the fear that Uranus felt is the hinge on which the entire next age of the world would turn. Uranus looked at his children, not the Titans. The Titans were vast and powerful, but they were comprehensible. They were forces of nature given awareness. Yes, but forces that moved on timescales that Uranus understood, in directions that he could anticipate, with powers that were enormous but not specifically threatening to him. The Titans were the world. Oceanus was the boundary of the world. Hyperion was its light. Themis was its law. These were not threats. These were the structure of reality, and Uranus was part of that structure, the sky above everything, the perspective from above that saw all of it simultaneously. The Cyclopes were different. He looked at Brontes with his single burning eye, and he saw what that eye could perceive. The internal structure of things, the hidden architecture of materials, the capacity to look at any substance in creation and understand exactly what it was made of and what it could be made into. He saw hands that could shape divine materials into objects of impossible power, objects whose power could be directed, aimed, released against a specific target with specific intention. He looked at Sterapes and Argesh and saw the same quality, each of them specialized in a different aspect of the same devastating capability. Three master craftsmen, three sets of eyes that could see what no other eyes could see, three pairs of hands that could make what no other hands could make. And then he looked at the Centimanes. Cottus with his 100 hands, Briareus with his inexhaustible force, Gyges with his 50 heads that could see in every direction simultaneously, and his 100 hands that could act on everything they saw. Three beings whose capacity for force exceeded anything that existed in creation, whose 100 hands each could release simultaneously more destructive energy than any army, any titan, any power that Uranus could imagine deploying against them. He felt it then. The feeling that the powerful are not supposed to feel. The feeling that power works very hard to prevent. The feeling that all the authority and the vastness and the perspective of being the sky above everything could not protect him from in this moment. Fear. Real fear. Not abstract concern. Not cautious awareness of risk, but the physical, immediate, undeniable fear of looking at something and understanding, without being able to argue yourself out of the understanding that it could destroy you. It is important to understand the logic of what Uranus felt, because it is a logic that runs through the entire mythology. It is a logic that the Greeks understood deeply and returned to repeatedly because they saw it everywhere in the world around them. Uranus was not unintelligent. He was not simply paranoid. He looked at the Cyclopes and the Centimanes, and he performed an assessment that was, in its narrow terms, accurate. These beings were more capable than he was in specific ways. The Cyclopes could make things he could not prevent. The Centimines could exert force he could not withstand. If these beings ever decided to act against him, he could not stop them. That assessment was correct. Everything that followed would prove it correct. The Cyclopes would eventually forge the weapons that ended the Titans' rule. The Centimines would eventually fight in the war that cast the Titans into Tartarus. Uranus's fear was not irrational. His reading of the potential danger was accurate. Where he went wrong was in the next step, in the move from accurate assessment to chosen response. Because there was more than one possible response to the situation. He could have tried to know these children, to understand what kind of beings they actually were, not just what they were capable of, but what they intended, what they valued, whether the power to harm him would ever become the desire to harm him. He could have tried to make them allies rather than enemies. He could have recognized that the greatest craftsman in creation and the most powerful physical force in creation, on his side, would make him more secure than any act of suppression ever could. He could have chosen any of these responses. He chose suppression. He chose to act on the fear directly and immediately, before it could grow larger, before the beings he feared could grow larger, before the situation could develop into something he could no longer control. He chose the response that the fearful and the powerful have chosen in every age of the world when confronted with something they cannot control. Eliminate it. He could not unmake the Cyclopes and the Centimines. They were Gaia's children. They had emerged from her body, and they were part of her and what Gaia had made. Only Gaia could unmake. And Gaia had not consented to any unmaking. But he could move them. He could take them from the surface of the world, from the light and the air and the open space where they existed, and push them downward, down through the earth, down through Gaia's own body, down through layer after layer of rock and darkness and geological time, down to the place that existed at the bottom of everything, down into Tartarus. He pushed them one by one. Brontes first, the single burning eye going dark as it descended below the surface, below the light, into the absolute dark of the deep earth. Then Sterapes, then Argesh, 3 craftsmen, 3 sets of extraordinary hands, pushed down through the body of their own mother into the abyss that existed at the foundation of the world. And then the Centimines, Cottus, with his 100 hands that had never yet struck a single blow. Briareus, with his inexhaustible energy that had nowhere to spend itself in the dark. Gyges, with his 50 heads that could see in every direction and nothing in any direction to see except darkness. Down and down and down. 9 days fall for a bronze anvil. That is how deep Tartarus was. He pushed them down into a place that deep, and he sealed it behind them. And they were gone from the world. Here is what the mythology requires us to understand, and what it is easy to pass over too quickly in the movement from one event to the next. Gaia was the earth. Tartarus was within the earth, within her. When Uranus pushed the Cyclopes and the Centimines into Tartarus, he was not sending them to some distant external place. He was pressing them into her body and sealing them there. She felt every moment of it. She felt Brontes being pushed down through her. She felt the weight of him descending, the brightness of his single eye extinguishing as it moved below the level where light existed. She felt him reach Tartarus. She felt the ceiling, the barrier closing behind him, separating him from everything above. She felt it 6 times. 6 children pressed into her body and sealed in the deep dark. 6 aware beings, conscious and present and trapped, living inside her. She could feel them there the way you feel a wound. Not the sharp, immediate pain of the moment of injury, but the constant awareness that something is wrong, that something is there that should not be there, that something has been done to you that has not healed and will not heal. She felt Brontes in the dark. She felt Steropes and Argesh. She felt Cottus with his 100 hands that had nowhere to reach in the confined darkness of Tartarus. She felt Briareus with his energy that had no outlet and nowhere to go. She felt Gyges with his 50 heads turning in every direction and finding nothing in any direction but rock and dark and the absolute silence of the deepest place in creation. She felt all of them simultaneously, all 6, all the time, without pause, without the mercy of forgetting, without the ability to look away or think of something else or find any comfort in the fact that they were alive and still present, because their presence was also their imprisonment, and she felt both things at once with every moment that passed. And the Titans continued in the world above. They moved through the vast spaces of the early Earth. Oceanus flowed around the edges of everything. Hyperion and Thea moved through the sky. Themis maintained the deep order. Mnemosyne preserved what had happened. The world went on, as the world always goes on, as if the thing that had been done to it had not been done. Uranus had suppressed the threat. He had removed the beings he feared from the world. He looked at the world now and saw the Titans and the sky and the mountains and the sea and the new young world, and it seemed secure. The things he had feared were gone. The danger he had identified had been addressed. What he did not see, because fear had narrowed his vision to the immediate and the tactical, was the larger shape of what he had done. He had not eliminated a threat. He had created one. He had taken beings who had no reason to oppose him and given them every reason. He had taken beings whose capabilities, on his side, would have made him truly secure and made them into enemies who would one day, when the opportunity came, help bring about exactly what he had tried to prevent. He had used Gaia, the being he had been made to companion, as a prison for her own children, and in doing so had transformed her from a partner into something else, into a mother who had been wronged. And a mother who has been wronged, who is as old as the earth and as patient as stone, and who has all of time to wait for the right moment, is the most dangerous thing in any mythology. Gaia said nothing. She held the 6 imprisoned children inside her, and she held the grief of what had been done, and she said nothing. And she began to plan. Gaia planned. This is the detail the mythology gives us, and it is a detail worth sitting with. Not that Gaia reacted, not that Gaia exploded in rage or immediately struck back or did any of the things that acute pain and acute grief make beings do when they have not had time to think. Gaia planned. She took the grief and the anger and the knowledge of what had been done to her children, and she held all of it inside her, and she turned it slowly, the way the earth turns over soil, the way stone is shaped by water over centuries, until it became something purposeful. She was the earth. She operated on geological timescales. She understood, in a way that beings of shorter perspective could not understand, that the right moment was not the immediate moment, that acting too soon, from pain rather than from clarity, would not produce the outcome she needed, that what was required was not a reaction but a plan, not a response to what had happened but the construction of what needed to happen next. So she planned. First she made a weapon. She made it from her own substance. From the hardest material she could produce within herself, the dense gray flint that existed in her deepest geological layers. Ancient stone compressed over incomprehensible spans of time into something that was harder than anything that existed on her surface. Hesiod calls the material adamantine. a word that means unconquerable, impossible to break, the hardest thing that could exist. She shaped it into a sickle. The choice of shape is significant. A sickle is not a sword. It is not a spear or an axe or any of the weapons designed specifically for warfare. A sickle is a harvesting tool, a blade curved in a specific way to cut grain at the stalk, to separate the part that bears fruit from the part that anchors it to the ground, to sever, to harvest, to take what is grown and bring it down. Gaia chose this shape deliberately. The weapon she made was not designed for battle in any conventional sense. It was designed for a specific act, a single cut, the separation of something from its source, the harvesting of a consequence that had been growing since the moment Uranus looked at his children and chose fear. She held it, the gray adamantine sickle, made from the hardest substance in creation, shaped with the specific intention of a mother who had decided that the time for waiting was over. She looked at it, and then she went to her Titan children. She gathered them, or she found them, one by one, in the vast spaces of the early world. Oceanus at the edges of everything, Hyperion in the brightness of the sky, Ceus at the axis of the heavens, Themis in the structure of the deep order, Mnemosyne in the preservation of what had passed. All 12 assembled before her, the full first generation of divine beings that she and Uranus had produced together. She showed them the sickle. She did not need to explain what it was for. They were Titans. They were ancient and intelligent, and they understood context. They had all felt, in their own way, what Uranus had done to their siblings. The absence of the Cyclopes and the Centimanes was felt in the world. 6 beings of extraordinary power and presence, simply gone, pushed into the deep and sealed away. Their brothers and sisters, imprisoned in the dark inside their own mother. They knew, and then Gaia asked her question, "Who among you is willing to do what must be done?" The silence that followed this question is one of the most telling moments in the entire mythology. 12 Titans, 12 of the most powerful beings in existence, ancient and vast and capable of things that would dwarf anything a mortal could accomplish. And they stood in front of their mother and her gray adamantine sickle, and they were silent. Oceanus looked toward his distant boundaries. Hyperion found something in the quality of the light that required his attention. Ceus examined the axis of the sky with sudden interest. Themis considered the deep structure of divine law. Mnemosyne attended to the preservation of what was passing. Crius studied the constellations. Iapetus became very concerned with something in the far distance. One by one, each of the 12 Titans found a reason to be elsewhere in their attention, a reason to be silent, a reason not to be the one who stepped forward. They were not cowards. This is important to understand. The Titans were not afraid in the simple sense. They were beings of enormous power, and they knew it. What they were was something more complicated than cowardly. They were comfortable. They had the world as it was. They moved through it freely. They governed their domains. Oceanus flowed at the edges of everything. Hyperion moved through the brightness. The Titans had what they had, and what they had was vast and ancient and real. And Gaia was asking them to risk all of it by acting against the sky itself, against Uranus, against the being who covered the world and could see everything within it, against their father. The cost of acting was real. The consequences of failure were serious. And the Titans, ancient enough to have developed the particular wisdom that comes from having a great deal to lose, counted the cost and found it too high. All of them, except one. Kronos was the youngest of the 12, the last born, and in the space that the eldest 12 had left by their silence, He stepped into it. He looked at his mother. He looked at the sickle. He looked at the question she had asked and the silence that had answered it from 11 directions. And he said yes. Why Kronos? Why the youngest, when the eldest had the most power and the most authority and the most established presence in the world? The mythology does not give a simple answer, but it offers several possibilities, and they are not mutually exclusive. Kronos was the most cunning of the Titans. He could see clearly. He could look at a situation and strip away the emotional and the habitual and the comfortable and see the underlying logic of it. And the underlying logic here was, to a sufficiently clear-eyed analysis, straightforward. Uranus had made enemies of beings he could have made allies. He had wronged Gaia in the most intimate way possible. He had sealed 6 children inside her body. The wound he had made was real and deep, and Gaia was the earth, and the earth did not forget wounds. Something was going to happen. The only question was when and by whose hand. Kronos also had, perhaps, the least to lose of the 12. The eldest Titans had deep roots in the world as it was. Oceanus was the boundary of everything, inseparable from the world's current structure. Hyperion was its light. Themis was its law. To change the world fundamentally was, for them, to change themselves fundamentally. Kronos was younger. He was not yet fully what he was going to be. He had less stake in the current arrangement and more to gain from a different one. And perhaps Kronos was simply the one with enough courage. Not the reckless courage that does not count the cost, but the rarer and more difficult courage that counts the cost clearly, understands exactly what is being risked, and steps forward anyway, because the alternative is to live in a world that has done this thing and will keep doing it. He stepped forward. Gaia gave him the sickle, the gray adamantine blade, made from her own substance, shaped with her own intention. She placed it in her youngest son's hands, and she told him what to do. He would hide. He would wait for the moment when Uranus descended to Gaia, as the sky descended to the earth each evening, as it had descended every evening since Uranus had been made. The sky comes down to the earth at the horizon. The light fades, and the boundary between sky and ground becomes uncertain, intimate, the two great realms pressing close together. This was when Uranus was most present, most immediate, most vulnerable. That was the moment. That was when Kronos would act. Gaia told him this, and Kronos listened and understood. He took the sickle. He felt the weight of it, the adamantine gray blade that had been made specifically for this specific purpose. He felt the intention that was in it, the grief and the patience and the decision. He went to hide. He found a place deep in the earth, close to the surface but below it, in the darkness of the ground itself. He settled into the rock and the soil, and he waited. The waiting was the hardest part, not because it was long, though it may have been long, not because it was uncomfortable, though it may have been uncomfortable, but because waiting requires you to hold your intention in place without acting on it, requires you to remain ready without releasing the readiness, requires the stillness that is not passivity but preparation. Kronos waited with the sickle in his hand and the evening coming toward him across the world. And when the sky began to descend, when Uranus moved downward toward the earth as he had moved every evening since Gaia had made him, when the boundary between them began to dissolve as it dissolved every night at sunset, Kronos was ready. He had said yes when no one else would. He had taken the sickle that no one else would take. He had hidden himself in the dark and waited when no one else would wait. And now the moment was arriving. Everything that the world was about to become was contained in the next few seconds. The evening came. It came the way every evening had come since Gaia made Uranus, and Uranus spread himself above her. The light faded at the western edge of the world. The colors left the sky slowly, the gold going first, then the orange, then the deep red at the horizon, until only a darkening blue remained, and then that too began to drain away into the first true darkness of the night. And with the fading of the light came the descent. Uranus moving downward toward Gaia, the sky pressing closer to the earth as the night arrived. The boundary between them becoming uncertain in the way it became uncertain every evening, the hard distinction between ground and air softening, the two great realms moving toward each other in the rhythm they had maintained since the first evening of the world. This was their intimacy, the nightly approach, the daily cycle of separation and return. Every morning the sky lifted away from the earth as the light returned. Every evening the sky descended as the light faded. Earth and sky, pulling apart and coming together in the oldest rhythm that existed. Kronos was waiting in the dark below the surface. He felt Uranus descending, not with his eyes, not with any physical sense that requires distance and light to operate, but with the awareness of a being who was part of the earth, who had placed himself within Gaia's body and could feel through her what she felt. He felt the sky coming closer. He felt the pressure of Uranus's approach the way you feel a change in the weather before it arrives, as a quality of the air, a shift in something that has no name, but is unmistakable once you have learned to read it. He gripped the sickle tighter, the gray adamantine blade, the hardest thing that existed, made from the earth itself by the earth itself for exactly this purpose. He felt its weight in his hand, and he felt the moment approaching, and he held himself completely still, the stillness of a hunter at the last moment before the action that everything has been building toward. And then Uranus was there. Kronos moved. The mythology does not dwell on the mechanics of it. Hesiod tells us it happened with the compression of a poet who understands that some things are conveyed better by their aftermath than by their description. Kronos struck with the sickle, and the wound was made, and the world changed. What can be said is this: the sickle was adamantine, and its edge was absolute. It had been made for one purpose, and it accomplished that purpose completely. The strike was not tentative. It was not the strike of a being who was uncertain or afraid or acting against his own conviction. It was the strike of a being who had said yes when no one else would, and had waited in the dark, and had held himself in readiness, and who, when the moment came, released everything that had been held. Uranus cried out. The sound of it was the sound of something fundamental breaking, not the sound of injury in any ordinary sense. The sound of the sky itself registering a wound. Every being in the world heard it, though they could not all have said afterward what they had heard. It was in the air before the concept of sound was in the air. It was in the ground beneath every foot, and in the water in every river. It was the cry of the oldest compact in creation being broken. The sky and the earth had been made for each other. Gaia had made Uranus to be her companion and her equal, and now her youngest son, with her own blade, had severed something between them that would never fully be restored. Uranus reeled backward, away from Gaia, up and away, retreating toward the heights that were his alone, abandoning the intimacy of the nightly descent that he would never make again in the same way. The wound driving him back, the sickle's work complete, the separation that had been performed now becoming the permanent new condition of the world. Here is something that the mythology encodes quietly and that deserves to be understood explicitly. Before Kronos struck, the sky and the earth were intimate. Uranus descended to Gaia every evening. The boundary between them was permeable, shifting, a matter of degree rather than of kind. The sky was close to the earth in a way it has not been since. After Kronos struck, Uranus withdrew. The distance between the earth and the sky that we experience as the natural order of things, the vast empty atmosphere that separates the ground from the heavens, the fact that the sky seems remote and high and separate from the world we walk on. This distance dates from this moment. Uranus withdrew and the withdrawal became permanent. The sky pulled back from the earth and has not returned in the same way since. We live in the world that was made by this withdrawal. Every time you look up at the sky and feel its remoteness, its height, its separation from the ground beneath your feet, you are feeling the consequence of what Kronos did with the sickle. The sky was closer once. The gods were closer once. And then the wound was made and the distance opened and has remained open. From the blood of Uranus, as he retreated across the sky, 3 things were born. Some of the blood fell into the sea. Where it fell, the ocean foam began to gather and churn and change. Something was forming in the white turbulence of the foam. Something that the world had not contained before and would never be without again. It rose from the water slowly. It took form, and the form it took was radiant, luminous with a quality that had nothing to do with ordinary light, warm with a warmth that was not temperature, beautiful in a way that exceeded any definition of beauty that had existed until that moment. Because until that moment, nothing had existed to establish what beauty was. Aphrodite, born from the blood of the sky falling into the sea, born from violence, born from betrayal, born from the moment a son struck his father with his mother's blade. The ancient Greeks understood love, not naively, not sentimentally. They looked at the force of desire, at the way it arrived without warning and dismantled everything in its path, at the way it made people do things they would not otherwise do and feel things they had no preparation for, and they saw that it was not a gentle or a safe thing. It was powerful in the way that violence was powerful. It arrived and changed everything the way a decisive action changed everything. It disrupted and rearranged and made the world unrecognizable. So they placed it here, at the moment of the first great violence in divine history. They said, love and the wound are not opposites. They come from the same source. Aphrodite rising from the sea foam, golden and impossible and already capable of causing more disruption in the divine world than any weapon Kronos carried, was born from the blood of the sky at the moment the sky was made to bleed. She drifted on the foam and the sea carried her, first to the island of Cythera and then to Cyprus, where she stepped ashore and where the earth broke into flowers beneath her feet. And the world that had been, until that moment, a world without desire, became a world with it. Permanently, irrevocably, from the blood that fell on land, 3 women rose. The Erinyes, Alecto, Megira, Tisiphone, unceasing, grudge, and vengeance. 3 beings who emerged from the earth where the sky's blood had soaked into the ground, who stood up fully formed and fully purposeful, who knew from the first moment of their existence exactly what they were and exactly what they were for. They were for pursuit. The Erinyes existed to pursue those who shed the blood of family, who murdered their parents, who raised their hands against those who had given them life, who broke the bonds of kinship, the most fundamental bonds in the ancient world, the bonds that defined who you were and who you were responsible to and who was responsible to you. The Erinyes were the consequence built into the act itself. They did not need to be summoned. They did not need to be asked. They did not respond to prayers or to authority or to any power that any being could bring to bear against them. They simply pursued, forever, across every distance, through every disguise, past every barrier, without rest, without mercy, without the possibility of negotiation or appeal or any argument that would cause them to stop. They were born from the blood that fell when Kronos struck his father. They were born from that specific act, in that specific moment, because the universe required that an act of that kind generate its own consequence. That the violence of a son against a father not go unrecorded and unpursued. They would have a great deal of work ahead of them. And then Uranus spoke. His voice fell downward as he retreated. Fell like rain, like the last heavy drops of a storm that is passing. It fell across the world and was heard by Kronos, who stood below with the sickle in his hand and the weight of what he had done settling around him. Uranus said, "You will be overthrown." He said, "Just as you have overthrown me, you will be overthrown." He said, "By your own child." He said, "This is the law of the sky, and it cannot be changed." Kronos stood in the silence that came after those words. He had won. The sky had retreated. The sickle had done what it was made to do. His imprisoned siblings would be freed. He was the most powerful being alive. The world was his. And 3 words were already in him. By your own child. He turned them over. He examined them. He looked at them from every angle that a cunning and calculating mind could look at them from. He tried to find the interpretation that made them less than what they seemed, the reading that offered some way out, the possibility that the prophecy was conditional or metaphorical or applicable to someone else. He found nothing. The words were what they were. By your own child. The victory was real. The fear was also real. And in that combination, in that specific mixture of triumph and terror, in the moment when the most powerful being alive heard the words that told him what his power could not protect him from, the next age of the world began. Not with the sound of the sickle, not with the cry of Uranus, not with the birth of Aphrodite from the sea foam or the rising of the Uranus from the blood-soaked ground. It began with 3 words, falling like rain, lodging in the mind of the being who heard them, beginning to grow. By your own child. The wheel had turned once. It was already preparing to turn again. The blood of Uranus fell. Some of it fell into the sea. And what happened next in the place where it fell was something that the world had never seen before and could not have anticipated. The sea foam gathered around the point of contact. It churned and thickened and changed in quality. Something was organizing itself within it. Something was forming. And then it rose. She rose from the water the way the moon rises. Slowly at first, then with a presence that was simply impossible to look away from once you had noticed it. The foam clung to her and fell away. The sea parted around her, and she stood on the surface of the water with a quality of presence that the world had never contained before and would never be without again from that moment forward. Aphrodite. Her name has been connected by ancient scholars to the Greek word for foam, Eros, foam-born, the goddess who rose from the churning sea foam at the point where the sky's blood met the water. This etymology was known to the Greeks themselves and was part of how they thought about her. She was not simply associated with the sea. She was born from it, in the most literal sense that the mythology allowed. But before we follow her from the sea to Cyprus to the divine world, we need to understand what it meant that this particular goddess was born from this particular moment. Aphrodite was the goddess of love. Not love in the comfortable greeting card sense. Not the warm, safe feeling of being with people who accept you. Not affection or fondness or the steady warmth of long companionship. Those are real things, and they are valuable things, but they are not what Aphrodite governed. Aphrodite governed desire, the force of it, the way it arrives without being summoned, without announcing itself, without asking permission, the way it makes people do things they would not otherwise do, the way it overrides reason and caution and self-preservation and the considered judgment of people who ought to know better, the way it has, throughout human history, caused wars and betrayals and the collapse of kingdoms and the abandonment of everything a person had built for the sake of something that arrived and rearranged everything around itself without apology. This force was born from violence, from the wound of the sky, from the blood of a father struck by his son with his mother's blade. The ancient Greeks were not being careless or random in placing Aphrodite here. They were saying something specific and important about the nature of the force she embodied. Love, real love, the love that changes everything and cannot be argued with, is not born from peace. It is not the product of comfortable circumstances and orderly lives. It arises from rupture, from the moment when the established order breaks open and something that was not possible before becomes suddenly inevitable. The wound in the sky was a moment of rupture, a moment when what had been was torn apart and what came next was not yet determined. And from that rupture, from the foam that gathered at the point where the sky's blood touched the sea, came the force that has been rupturing things ever since. The ancient poet Hesiod, writing in the Theogony, gives us the most complete account of Aphrodite's birth. He tells us that she formed in the foam around the severed part of Uranus as it was carried by the waves first toward the island of Cythera and then to Cyprus. That she stepped from the sea at Cyprus as a fully formed goddess. That wherever she walked the grass and flowers sprang up around her feet. That Eros and Hyperion, desire and longing, were her companions from the moment she stepped ashore. That the gods who saw her recognized immediately what had arrived in the world. Cyprus was sacred to Aphrodite from that first moment. The island and the goddess were bound together. The Cypriots maintained her oldest and most significant temples. The city of Paphos on the western coast of Cyprus was her city, the place where she had first touched land, where the sea had delivered her to the world. When the Greeks or the Romans wanted to speak of Aphrodite at her most primordial, her most essential, they spoke of the Cyprian goddess, the one who came from the sea at Cyprus, the one whose story began where the sky's blood met the water. Homer, writing about Aphrodite in the Iliad and the Odyssey, gives her a different origin. In Homer, she is the daughter of Zeus and the Titaness Dion. This is one of the many places where the two great strands of Greek mythology, Hesiod's cosmological account and Homer's heroic epics, diverge. Scholars have spent centuries trying to reconcile these two traditions. The simplest answer is that they represent different local traditions that were never fully unified, different stories about the same goddess that coexisted without needing to be resolved into a single authoritative account. What both traditions agree on is who Aphrodite was and what she governed. However she came into existence, she was the goddess of love and desire and beauty. She was the force that drew beings toward each other with an intensity that exceeded any rational explanation. She was the presence that made things beautiful, that made beauty something worth pursuing, that made the perception of beauty in another being into something transformative. She was not gentle. This is the first thing to understand about her, and it is the thing that the comfortable modern associations with love and beauty most consistently obscure. Aphrodite caused the Trojan War, not directly, not by her own hand, but by the chain of consequences that flowed from her actions. When the goddess Eris threw the golden apple inscribed for the fairest among the divine guests at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, and when the dispute over that apple came to Paris of Troy to judge, and when Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world if he chose her, and when Paris chose her and claimed Helen, and when the Greek world went to war for 10 years to get Helen back, that entire catastrophe traced back to Aphrodite, to the force she embodied, to the absolute indifference of desire to the consequences of its satisfaction. She used her power without apology. When Psyche was celebrated for her beauty in a way that drew worshippers away from Aphrodite's temples, Aphrodite sent her son Eros to make Psyche fall in love with something monstrous. When Hippolytus, the young Athenian hero, refused to honor her and devoted himself exclusively to Artemis and the hunt, Aphrodite destroyed him. She made his stepmother Phaedra fall in love with him, and the consequences of that impossible love killed them both. Aphrodite did not forgive those who dismissed her. She was married to Hephaestus, the divine smith, the craftsman of the gods, and she was famously unfaithful to him. Her love affair with Ares, the god of war, was one of the most celebrated and most examined relationships in the mythology. Love and war, drawn together, the two most overwhelming forces in the world, wound around each other. Their children were Eros, the god of love in his more specific and more dangerous form, and Harmonia, whose name meant harmony and whose existence seemed almost paradoxical given her parents. And also Phobos and Deimos, fear and terror. The children of love and war included fear and terror. The Greeks were not surprised by this. She was not exclusively concerned with human love. She governed all desire. The desire of gods for mortals, which generated many of the most important stories in the mythology. The desire of mortals for gods, which almost always ended badly. The desire of mortals for each other, which sometimes elevated them and sometimes destroyed them. She presided over all of it with the same impartial, impersonal, overwhelming force. She did not distinguish between the love that built things and the love that burned them down. She was the force itself. What you did with it was your own affair. Why did the ancient Greeks give so much attention to Aphrodite? Why was she one of the 12 Olympians, one of the central figures of the divine world, rather than a minor deity of pleasant experiences? Because they understood that desire was not peripheral to human life. It was not a decoration on the surface of existence. It was one of the organizing forces of everything. Cities were built because people wanted to be near each other. Trade happened because people desired what others had. Art was made because artists desired to create and because others desired to experience what was created. Wars were fought over desire. Civilizations were founded on the arrangements that desire made necessary and desire complicated. Aphrodite was the divine name for the force behind all of that. Not just romantic desire, though that was her most famous domain. The desire to be beautiful, the desire to be desired, the desire for pleasure and for the things that gave pleasure, the desire for connection, for recognition, for the specific experience of being seen and valued by another conscious being. All of it was hers. She was born from the blood of the sky falling into the sea, from the wound that Kronos made, from the foam that gathered at the meeting of two incompatible things. She was born from rupture, and she never stopped being about rupture. Every love story is a rupture in the ordinary order of a life. Every moment of genuine desire is the moment when the established arrangement of things stops being sufficient and something new, something overwhelming, something that could not be planned for, makes its presence known. That is what Aphrodite was. That is what she has always been. Born from the sea foam at the edge of the ancient world, stepping ashore on Cyprus with flowers blooming under her feet, bringing into existence the force that no god or mortal has ever successfully resisted. From the blood of Uranus that fell on land, not into the sea but onto the earth, the ground of Gaia herself, three figures rose. The Uranus, the Furies, the most implacable beings in the entire mythology. Their names were Alecto, Megira, and Tisiphone. Unceasing, grudge, and vengeance. Three sisters who rose fully formed from the blood-soaked earth at the moment the sky was wounded by its own sun. Who knew from the first instant of their existence exactly what they were and exactly what they were for. They were for pursuit. The Uranus existed to pursue a specific category of wrongdoer. Not all criminals, not all transgressors, not all who broke human law or divine law. Only those who committed a specific kind of crime. The crime of shedding the blood of family, of murdering a parent, of raising a hand against those who had given you life, of betraying those to whom you were bound by the most fundamental bonds of kinship. They could not be bribed. There was no gift large enough, no sacrifice magnificent enough, no plea eloquent enough to cause an Uranus to stop once she had begun her pursuit. They could not be argued with. They were not interested in extenuating circumstances. They did not care about intention or context or the complexity of the situation that had produced the crime. They cared about the fact. The blood had been shed. The bond had been broken. They would pursue until justice was done, by whatever standard of justice satisfied their implacable nature. They could not be escaped. Every disguise was transparent to them. Every distance could be crossed by them. Every hiding place could be found. The guilty party could travel to the ends of the earth, could cross Oceanus and enter the unknown world beyond, could descend into the underworld itself, and the Uranus would follow. They had no other purpose. They had nowhere else to be. They had infinite time and infinite patience, and they would keep coming. The Greeks believed in this form of justice because they believed that certain acts were wrong in a way that transcended any individual judgment or any particular legal system. That murdering your parents was not simply a crime against a specific person or against a specific society. It was a crime against the structure of existence itself, against the bonds that made any form of community possible, against the basic order of the world. The Uranus were born from the wound of Uranus because that wound was precisely the kind of act they existed to pursue. A son acting against his father, blood shed in the oldest family. The Uranus emerged from that blood because the act that shed it called them into being. And they would have work to do. They would pursue Orestes for the murder of his mother Clytemnestra. They would be central to the great dramatic tradition of Athens, appearing in the trilogy of Aeschylus as both the instruments of justice and the problem that justice had to solve. They would be present wherever the blood of family was shed throughout the mythology. From the same blood of Uranus that fell on the earth, in the same moment or in the drops that fell in different places, the giants were born. The Gigantes, a race of enormous, powerful beings who sprang from the earth where the sky's blood had soaked into it. Not individual figures with individual stories at this moment. Not the named heroes and villains of later mythology, but a race. A category of beings, present in the world from the moment of the wound, waiting for the moment when their story would begin in earnest. That moment would come. It would come after the Titans had been defeated and after Zeus had established his rule over the divine world. And at that point, the giants would rise in what the mythology called the Gigantomachy, the War of the Giants, and they would challenge the Olympians in the first great threat to the new divine order. That story belongs to a later time. For now, the giants were simply newly born, creatures of the earth, enormous and fierce, carrying in their blood the heritage of the sky's wound. Children of Gaia and of the blood of Uranus, the earth and the sky's injury combining to produce something that would one day challenge the gods who replaced the beings from whose conflict the giants had been born. The world after the wound of Uranus was different from the world before it in ways that could not be undone. Aphrodite was in it. Desire was in it, in its full, overwhelming form, as a divine presence that would govern the behavior of gods and mortals from that point forward. The Erinyes were in it. The consequence of family violence was in it, as a force that could not be avoided, as a pursuit that would continue forever once it had been set in motion. The giants were in it. The future challenge to the Olympian order was in it, already growing in the blood-soaked earth, waiting for its moment. And Uranus had retreated. The sky had pulled back from the earth, and the distance between them had become the permanent condition of the world. And Kronos stood with the sickle in his hand, and the prophecy in his heart, and the world at his feet. He was the most powerful being alive. The Titans would be freed. The Golden Age would begin. Everything he had done had worked exactly as his mother had planned. And 3 words were growing in him like a root growing through stone. Slowly, patiently, inevitably, the way things grow when they have been planted deep and have all the time in the world. By your own child. Everything that followed came from those 3 words. Everything. The swallowed children and the hidden god, and the stone wrapped in cloth, and the 10 years of war, and the lightning bolt, and the 12 thrones on Olympus. All of it. Every story that the mythology would tell from this point forward. All of it rooted in the prophecy that fell from the sky with the blood, that entered Kronos' mind and began to grow, that made the most powerful being alive afraid of his own children before those children existed. The wound of Uranus was the wound from which everything else bled, and the world would spend the rest of its mythology trying to heal it. This is where we leave you for tonight. But the story isn't over. Kronos rules the world now, but the 3 words are already growing inside him. When Rhea comes into his life, the most powerful being alive will face the one thing no power can stop. The future arriving. Next time, Kronos takes the throne, he marries Rhea. This is a chronological series. Every episode picks up exactly where the last one left. You don't need to hold anything in your mind right now. Just rest. Your body needs this. Your mind needs this. And we'll be here every 2 days with the next chapter. Tomorrow, and we say this with certainty, the names you heard tonight will feel more familiar. That is not nothing. That is exactly what this time was for. Millions of people lie awake at night convinced they are falling behind. That every hour of sleep is an hour lost. You know something they haven't figured out yet. This time was not wasted. It never was. If tonight felt like something, if these stories found you at the right moment, subscribe and join us. Leave a comment. Hit like. We're building this community together, and your support helps us keep going. And if you'd like to know how much sleep your mind and body actually need, not a general answer, yours specifically, visit us at geniussleep.rest. We built a free sleep calculator there, just for you. Enter your age, your lifestyle, your daily rhythm, and it will tell you exactly how much sleep your body needs. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. Every episode, every night, wherever you listen. Genius Sleep Academy will be here every time you close your eyes. Sleep well.